In today's third video about 3D printing, I'm going to review the Gear Guts Star Pharaon miniatures after painting them. And it's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, in this third and final part of me talking about 3D printing, I'm going to paint the miniatures that I received from Gear Guts Mech Shop. These are the Necron Star Pharaon equivalent miniatures. We've got the Doomstalker equivalent and some sword and board Lich Guard. We're going to paint them up and then we're going to do a full review about these miniatures. So I gave you some thoughts on these 3D printed miniatures in my last video, but as I always say, never judge a mini until you've painted it. Sometimes it can really change your perception, either because it just looks better painted or because you have so much fun painting it that you just start to appreciate the miniatures a bit more. So with that said, let's have a chat about painting these miniatures from Gear Guts Mech Shop. Now, I painted these minis exactly the same way as I have my other Necron miniatures. If you want to see full painting tutorials on both how to paint vehicles and how to paint Lich Guard, then I'll link those two videos up for you at the end of this one. As I said in my last video, there was no need to wash these minis. I just spray canned primed them black and started painting. Both the primer and the paint went onto the minis exactly the same as plastic, metal or resin, so no issues painting them at all. I matched the paint scheme of the Apocalypse Walker to my Doomstalkers, and even though there were some differences between the two miniatures, that was pretty easy to do. In terms of detail, the only issue on this model was on the Gauss flayers, the green rod section as I like to call it. Well, it just wasn't quite as crisp as it could have been. Now, to be fair, I hadn't quite cleaned up the flayers as well as maybe I could have done. I just seem to have missed a couple of bits. However, as you will see later in the video, once painted, you can't really see it unless you look very closely. Now, here are the Medjay Pharaoh Guards with Hex Phase, Cofficius and Repulsor shields all painted up. These are of course the Lich Guard sword and board equivalents. There is a lot of good detail on these minis and it's all nice and crisp. The grooves on the tabard, the eyes and the teeth are excellent. However, I did have an issue with the very fine detail on the sword. It's the green curved rod above the blade. It actually has a little pattern on it, very similar to what is on the Games Workshop Lich Guard miniatures, but the pattern just wasn't crisp enough for me to paint. Not with my eyes anyway. So instead I just painted right over it with green. It still works, and to be fair, it matches into the original Lich Guard very well. I just feel that if the detail isn't going to come out that well, then it might be better just not to have the detail there at all, or make those tiny details just a bit more basic and thus bigger. Overall though, I had a lot of fun painting these guys, and even though they are pretty different from the originals aesthetically with their Egyptian look, I was able to match them in pretty well to my original Games Workshop miniatures. Now let's talk about the aesthetics a bit more. The truth is, I don't really like them. I'm not saying they don't look cool, but for me, they are a bit too Egyptian themed. My Necrons are more T-800 Terminator based Necrons rather than space Egyptians, but that is just me. However, I don't dislike them, and even with a very different look, they still work against the Games Workshop miniatures, and to be honest, I want another 5 of these miniatures so that I can have a unit of 10 completing my collection of 30 Lich Guard. Now, there is something that I want to bring up, and something I haven't mentioned so far in this series, and that is the scale of these miniatures. These guys are a bit chunkier than the Games Workshop miniatures, the legs are bigger in scale, and so are the shields. The heads are also a bit bigger, especially with the ears. They don't stand any taller than the Games Workshop miniatures, but with the exception of the arms, they just look overall chunkier. However, when it comes to the Stalker equivalent, the Apocalypse Walker, that is a different story. The Mini is clearly a lot taller than the original, and just like the previous Minis, it's also a bit chunkier. The legs span a bit bigger, the head is slightly bigger, and the gun on top is quite a bit bigger. Now, I'm not sure if they are supposed to be bigger. Maybe that was done as an extra IP infringement sort of deterrent, but it is something to be aware of. Oh, and just for reference, I also magnetised the midsection of this Mini, just like I did the Games Workshop one, and the magnets stick to the material with no issues. Okay, so now I want to talk about the base of the Apocalypse Walker, because I forgot to mention this in the last video. The Games Workshop Mini has extra material on the legs so that it's easier to glue to the base, but this Mini doesn't, and it just has 3 very small connecting points. I was very worried about this, to be honest, when I looked at the miniature. How would it glue to the base? But actually I had no issues. I just put a good amount of super glue on the base where the leg was going to be, and then I just put it into place and let it fully dry before touching it, and it stuck very well. I've literally had no issues with it at all. On a side note though, I didn't actually get bases with the miniatures. I had to buy them separately. Now, I'm not sure if this is the case with all of their minis or just the ones they sent me, but yeah, I had no bases. So there you go. Overall, I really enjoyed building and painting these miniatures. They look very cool, and even though they are a bit different, they do match into the Games Workshop range quite well. There is a big range of minis available, and not just the Necrons Star Pharaoh range. So why not have a look at the website for yourself? There is a link in the description below. As I said in the last video, these minis are not going to save you a fortune compared to Games Workshop prices, but if you want minis to play and you are only a casual player rather than playing at events, these could be an option for you. Now, if you didn't see the first videos in the series, here they are in a playlist for you to watch, and here are the painting tutorials that I was talking about earlier in the video.